personally, I'm really delighted to be here with Scott. And one of the things I've enjoyed most about being here at the Food Industry News and workshops and this particular Shmoozefest is it's real people, guys. I mean, this is a really genuine fellow you're going to meet today. He's just like us. He's ambitious. He's hardworking. He's created a brand that is pretty amazing. I'll let him expand on that. And I believe in a short period of time that we're going to be together, there's something we can learn. And that's really the idea of being here together, right? So before we do that, I'll share with you a really quick story. I happen to be 62 years of age, and I've been doing this my entire career, and I've had the privilege of traveling all over the country, and I've worked for some really amazing international corporations throughout the world, and I was amongst a bunch of my peers, and they're all kind of bragging about all their accomplishments and all the things that they've done. And they looked at me and they said, "Mario, what are you most proud of?" And I thought about it, and I was thinking I'm going to impress them with something really cool, and I thought, shit, I haven't dyed my hair yet. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I am getting there. That said, I'm going to turn the mic over here to Scott in just a moment. And Scott, it's great to see you, buddy. Scott and I happen to be business neighbors in Weiner Park. He's got 50/50 there on Division Street. I've got Takito Kitchen, so we get the privilege of seeing each other every once in a while. That said, one of the things I'm interested in knowing, and I believe you guys are interested in knowing just the same, is a little bit about Scott's background and really what inspired him to get into the restaurant business. And with that, I'll hand the mic over to you, Scott.
Hey everybody, nice to see everyone. See some familiar faces. So speaking of hair, at least you have it. When mine does grow, it is gray hair, and we don't know anymore on top.
I gotcha.
So, you know, it's always interesting every time you get to talk about yourself in front of other people. Yeah, you never know what I'm going to say because I get nervous. So if I say something that could get me in trouble later, I'm going to come after each one of you for your phones. But how did I get into business? It was simple. I needed a job, and I played sports in high school, and I was pretty decent, but I was always typically hurt after football. So I wasn't really able to play basketball. One particular year I tore my calf. My mom was like, well, get your ass a job. So I used to live behind Northbrook Court, and that's where I would work. So at this particular time, there was this was in 1995. The first time Johnny Rockets, when it had just been sold for the first time to a private equity group, and they were starting to grow it. So this was the first location outside of like the iconic like 6 that they had around the country. They were hiring 15-year-old kids that thought they knew everything, and that was my first job in the restaurant industry. I started as a cashier for about a day, and then I realized that the money to be made was waiting tables. So the next day I'm waiting tables, you know, dropping your own fries, making your own milkshakes, your own busser, all those things, which, you know, looking back is such a great way to get into the business. You know, truly learning to run your station like a business. This was also right when they were re-releasing Star Wars for the first time. So I was in a mall, working on the weekends, wearing my funny hat, and I just sort of fell in love with the environment of what a Friday night, a Saturday night in a restaurant looked like. And the rest is history. It's all I've ever wanted to do since, and it pretty much is all I've ever done since. So I knew early that this was sort of the passion for me. And I'll tell you, like, we're all crazy in our own ways, right? And we all come from different places. We all want to make an impact. For me, I knew at that point that I didn't want to be a president or a professional baseball player or whatever it might have been. My impact on the world was I was going to make people come to my restaurant and leave happy. And that's all I've ever tried to do since.
Yeah, let's go there. And so what we don't know, y'all may not know, is you also had a stint with Let Us Entertain You for quite a while. So let's fast forward into that first restaurant. Tell us a little bit about that. What inspired you and how you named it, a little bit about that first restaurant.
Well, so we're talking about the 50/50 on Division. So, yeah, fast forward, what was I? Literally 10 years later, I opened up the 50/50. I was 26, 11 years. And I worked at Joe's with lettuce, which I went to school for hospitality administration. So I did have the advantage of knowing what I wanted to do early and prepared myself for it through education, through job experience. I mean, it would have been easy to wait tables. I went to UNLV, I lived in Vegas. Granted, I wasn't old enough to wait tables, but there was better ways to make money than being a cook or dishwasher. So I did do those things because I knew it would pay dividends later. Got a job at Joe's. I applied like anyone else, monster.com back then. I was 23 when I started there. I was a manager. I was also probably the youngest employee there. And yeah, it was a great master's degree. And I was fortunate because it was a great place for lettuce, still is. I got to spend a lot of time around Rich and a lot of people that still made that company special. And I left because I figured if I was going to fail, might as well do it when you're 26, 27, and the bankruptcy is off my record by 33. I could still have a normal life. Plus, I had no family, no wife, no kids, and I knew that I was capable of putting in a lot of hours. I wanted to do it, and that it's harder and harder to do it as you get older. I had no one to depend on me but me. So, left. We'd actually wrote a good business plan, me and my partner Greg. Greg was actually my boss at Joe's. He was giving me my review. I was the AGM at one point. I gave him a 1 year's notice. He told me I was crazy to think about leaving. And it took me about 6-7 months to convince him to leave with me. But when I did, we wrote a business plan. We actually went out and started raising money. We didn't know what the name of this place was going to be. I'm very close with Greg's mom, and we were leaving after raising a unit somewhere. And boys, what are you going to call the place? We don't know. Did you get the loan? Yes. And they didn't ask you what you're going to call the place? No. She's like, well, you better figure it out soon, or you're going to be fucked on this thing 50-50. And that's how the name came about. We've never been good at naming anything, by the way. We just opened up a cannabis dispensary called OK. Roots was our pizza place. I heard about the TV show and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, some of these things work out, and it's about the meaning behind it. So that's how 50-50 came about.
Isn't that fascinating? That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. So let's go into multi-unit operations, right? So you've got 50-50 going. You decide, give us a little fast forward. Where did you go from 50-50 between then and now? Because since then, you've opened quite a few restaurants. Roots being another brand, OK being another brand. One of the arguments is, why not just choose one brand and move forward with one brand? Instead, you created multiple brands. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first off, that's a good argument, because I still don't know if I made the right decision.
Okay.
No. So, we opened 50-50 March 19th, 2008. Somewhere in that first year, if you guys, some of you remember the financial crisis that happened, right? So we opened up a place that we were very proud of, and then watched the neighborhoods around us, the economy kind of crumble for a little bit. And somehow you have those opportunities. Do I take shortcuts? What do I want to do? Do I want to change my food? This, that. You question everything, honestly. And especially when you leave a place like Joe's and you're busy 7 days a week. Why am I not busy 7 days a week? My food's good, my service is good, I'm doing everything right, I'm changing menus, like what sports bar is changing their menus seasonally and doing, soft shell, I'm doing things. But we kept with it, and we ended up being not a pandemic, we ended up being a financial crisis success. Our investors liked us because we were returning capital in a time when most people thought they'd lose it all. And then I'm looking around and, I'm seeing real estate around us that we always have tried to buy our real estate. So that's partially why 50-50 is still open after 16 years. We own the property. I saw a big piece of property on Chicago Avenue, which I suspected might be the next street after Division, that was going to see development. I found a nice corner property, and the building next to it was almost like a throwaway. And we had been working with these people from a bakery at the time called Bleeding Heart Bakery. So we said, oh, why not? Let's see if we can do it. So we got into roots, and then because of the building next to it, we ended up getting the bakery business. And then we said, well, let's open up a rooftop, because why not? Rooftops are going to be the next cool thing. And believe it or not, at the time, this is 2011 that we opened, there was only one other rooftop in the city with a liquor license, and that was, well, the WIT was right around that same time too. What's the place that was at the Dana Hotel? Because we eventually took it over. Anyhow, there weren't a lot of rooftops at the end of the day. So yeah, and what ended up happening was Roots opened and there was lines out the door. And this probably up until the pandemic might have been one of the highest grossing restaurants in Westtown. And we were absolutely killing it there. On the other side, Westtown Bakery, which is what it became, that was we'll call it a labor of love. Because it struggled. It struggled, and we lost money, and I felt I was completely over leveraged. So rather than expand upon the roots quickly and take advantage of this, and maybe I could open up 10 and sold it, and we wouldn't be talking right now. I'd be phoning in from an island. Rather than that happening, I decided to try to make Westtown Bakery successful. And we opened up more little satellites and really focused there. I was our wholesale salesperson for a bit. As we started working on Homestead, which is above Westtown, same LLC, same P&L, I became our first wedding coordinator, which I was fantastic at. And, so a lot of these things led to other things. Westtown Bakery, somebody needed a satellite, or someone needed a food and beverage offering in a hotel, didn't have Black Iron. Well, we also want a bar, that became the Berkshire Room. Kimpton took notice of that and said, we want you guys to do something like that in our place, and that became a place called Steadfast. And it just kept, blossoming from there. The Kimpton guys gave us a great reference, which ended up being this and that. And, at the end of the day, I questioned myself, maybe I should have just done Roots. Now, what's interesting today is we ended up timing the last 2 Roots openings perfectly, right in the pandemic. One of them being in the most expensive piece of real estate we've ever bought, South Loop. The air rights are great. Someone wants to buy it from me. And what's interesting though is Roots now has kind of come back to reality. It's still a fine business. It probably, they each do somewhere above $3.5 million. Not in the 5s anymore. Where Westtown Bakery, on the other hand, this place that I was the bane of my existence, actually last year had the best year it's ever had, and will eclipse that this year. So, it's a weird world. I don't know, but that's ultimately where we're at.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with 50/50, it's a wonderful sports bar. I would argue a little upscale than your normal sports bar. The food is exceptional. Beverage program is really strong. And want a good pizza and more, Roots is amazing. So treat yourself to those brands. I highly encourage it. Now, I'm going to talk about cannabis, but not yet, okay? Because I know a lot of you guys are probably interested in knowing about that, as I am. But before we go there, I want to talk to you about your challenges. Now, I'm in the restaurant industry. I've got 3 locations, and I found 2023 to be just funky for us. I'm interested in knowing how it was for you and some of the challenges or perhaps even opportunities that you've seen as a result of the last 16 months of business.
Well, so one of the things I didn't answer the last multi-unit, right? That's a different question too, but that falls into what my challenges are. So when we were small, we were 3, 4, 5 restaurants. I was the director of operations, the CFO. I mean, we all wore a lot of hats, right? And I was very, very protective on anybody we'd hire above store. Because I believe that if your job is above store and you're not making jobs, the people's jobs that are ringing the till, right? Your managers, your servers, if you're not making their jobs easier and you're above store, then you don't deserve to be around. So for me, the answer was, when do we start adding more resources above store, is when I became ineffective above store, or my business partner did, or the few people we had couldn't keep up, right? So just before the pandemic, literally just before the pandemic, we brought in consultants to help us, because I wasn't able to get out of my sort of bullheaded stubbornness, how to run a business, what a restaurant should be like. And I knew we needed people that I knew that I wasn't as effective as I once was running an organization, so I needed to sort of create those positions. But I didn't want to lose the things that made us special to get there. So we actually brought in, and there's a lot of people that do this stuff called EOS, or traction, right? Brought in the consultant, did the whole thing, kind of refocused on what's our core values, what's the company today. I can't keep quoting Rich Melman or someone else, like what are our core values? And through that, really focused on what's our accountability chart look like, all these different tools and things. And it worked out for us where we actually did pretty well for most of the pandemic. Not because of PPP, but Roots had always had its own delivery service. We always had our own delivery drivers. Flipping a switch to delivery for us was easy. And we weren't paying 20–30%. So it was fine. It was fine. All that happened was I cut my front of the house labor out and I had people driving. Westtown Bakery still did fairly well. And my management agreements, the places where I don't pay the lease, where I just come in to manage, they were, shut down, or they needed us to just do little things around the hotel or whatever it was. So, we did fine, but where the challenges are, where they've been, is now since, where we're all probably sitting here and, you've got inflation, you've got all these things, crime, all these little reasons why we're not where we used to be, right? And we can all make excuses. We're probably also not as good as we were too. A lot of people left. We're rebuilding our culture. There's tons of things, right? But ultimately, when you get big above store, I've learned you also bleed out pretty damn quick. So when we realized we had all this infrastructure here, we're ready to grow. I was supposed to open up another 5 or 6 restaurants this year. A lot of them are still opening, they're just on hold. You start realizing that it's not fair to my partners to have all these resources that are here for the future. And it also isn't fair to me because, I'm sitting here, and to the people we hired, they're not doing what we need them to do either, right? So what our biggest challenge now, where we're at from multi-unit, is have a company that is raring and ready to go to open up 5 more stores and grow, but those things aren't happening on time. And my consumers that come to my old restaurants, the ones that I've had, they're not all spending what they used to spend. Or they're not coming out after night or after dark for various reasons, whatever they might be. But ultimately, that's my biggest challenge now. Having enough of the infrastructure to do what I need to run my business, be smart about the future, but also not leave too much money on the table, because for anybody that just went through this last winter, it feels like it's been one long winter since COVID ended, and many of our places still are not at their 2019 levels. So that's the challenge we deal with.
Let's talk a little bit about human resources. You've talked a lot about talent and people. How are you appealing to keep good staff, and what are you doing to appeal to new staff coming in? What is it about your group that you would say makes you a place that people would want to work?
We've got, at one point our benefits were better than anyone's, right? When we opened in 08, we had subsidized health insurance. We were paying 50%. So that was before, Obamacare or affordable health care. We've always had great benefits. Today, you just have to have them. We promote from within. We're growing. People look and say, oh, they've done well. This is a company we want to be a part of. Are we throwing lavish employee parties like we once were? No. So we're challenged. We're challenged to be. We're trying to be mentors to young people, to be good examples. But we're also doing it. We're all wearing a lot of hats again. What are we doing better? I don't know. I would tell you this. I think that there's probably places where the owner's there at the store every day, assuming he's a nice owner and not in the business for the wrong reasons. I would say for a young person trying to learn this business, that's going to be a great place to learn it. I would also say there's big companies out there that copy and paste the same concept everywhere, and it feels stale to be there. You feel like a piece of the machinery. So at the same time though, everyone has to play a role at some point. So we're trying to create that balance of, you know, mentoring young people, knowing they have an opportunity to grow with us, but also we don't necessarily have all the resources that we would like to have to be able to make everything as fun as it could be, right? At the end of the day, this isn't a 9 to 5. It's still a hard job. And you know, working in the restaurant industry, you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff that you see your friends doing on Instagram. So that's some of the challenges that we deal with right now with the young talent we bring in. Is their idea of what this industry is different than what a lot of us knew it was when we got into it. I mean, so.
Those are good answers. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you guys to ask some questions as well, so be prepared for that. Let's go a little bit about, there are people perhaps in the audience that either want to open a restaurant or want to expand their restaurant concept. What would be your advice to them today?
I mean, if you want to get into the restaurant business right now, you know, you just know exactly what your voice is, exactly why you want to do it, right? You can't just do it, be in it for the right reasons. You know, the stuff you guys are, everybody here really knows. I don't see any rookies in the audience here. But if you're doing it to get laid, to get drunk, to be a big shot, you're gonna fail pretty quickly. If you just want to open it for feed your ego, you know, guess what? That's why most people want to open up a restaurant and it doesn't work. Expanding though is sort of the interesting thing, because I think one of the reasons we expanded was because so I've got 3 kids. My oldest is 6.5, then I got a 3.5, and I got a 10-month, right? And I'm trying to do the math on the longevity of a restaurant. When the restaurant stops paying me, which, you know, 50-50, the original Roots, I don't get checks from them anymore. You know, we own the real estate. And then how much it's going to take to pay for my kids' college, and then realizing that my closest kid to college is about 12 years from it. So that's why I keep opening restaurants now. But you know, there's some places, like, I still have a long time to work. I'm 43, is what it comes down to. Why we opened up, we were always opportunistic before that. But I think, yeah, at a certain point you realize that, you know, you got to keep opening up restaurants if you want to eat. So, why would anyone here want to open up a second restaurant? Just because you want to be a restaurant group? I mean, like I said, our restaurant group's name is 50/50 Group, because we're like, well, that's, you know, let's name it after the first place. That's easy. But I think the reasons for doing it might be economies of scale. Although in the way things currently are today, that's not always the case. You know, you may not be able to have one manager oversee 2 or this or that. So I think there's got to be a strong financial reason for it. Chances are, if you've got this concept that you think is better than most people's, chances are someone's probably doing it already somewhere else. They're doing it better, or today's day and age, Instagram, a new idea, I mean, it gets stolen pretty damn quickly. So, you know, unless you've got a lot of money in real estate and you've got a quick plan to get to 10 or 20, you know, it's hard to know a real good reason to open up a second one.
Well said, thank you. So I'll open up to the audience, and then again, we're going to talk cannabis. We can talk about it now, or if that's your question. But any questions in the audience I can get the mic to? Any at the moment, rather? None? Okay, let's go into cannabis. Okay, obviously a really growing industry throughout Illinois and perhaps lots of parts of the country. What was the inspiration to do that? And if you don't know, Scott and his group just recently opened, I think, one of the first restaurants and cannabis dispensary, certainly in Illinois, but perhaps even in the country.
Yeah, so we've got 3 of them. And they were the first in the country to have a liquor license, dispensary license, one of them with a consumption lounge, as well as a bar next door. So unique stuff. Why did I get into it? Well, I thought the money would be easier. I was trying to diversify from restaurants a little bit. But, I mean, I saw an opportunity. At the end of the day, you know, it just kind of makes sense. During the pandemic especially, we saw these waiting rooms, right, where people would just sit there and wait. What felt like a sterile, like, almost like you're at like a really bad immediate care, you know. And I was like, somebody can do better than this, you know. And I was like, why not just have coffee and donuts to start, right? And then actually, Dispensaries reached out to us at West Town Bakery. Hey, can we get some coffee and donuts in our waiting room? I'm like, yeah, we're definitely might be onto something. I ended up getting brought in as a part of a license, 2 groups, because the people that were putting it together said, if this guy can make it in restaurants where the margins are very tight and knows how to stand up a business, there's a good chance he'll be able to help us, you know. And these licenses were, you know, the social equity license, not a lot of people had capital behind it. So even figuring out creative ways to raise the capital for these licenses was part of what I did. And you know, before that, I'm not a huge cannabis user. I've learned a lot about it, and like I've had 5 knee surgeries, right? So I'd definitely rather take a gummy than an Oxycontin or a Vicodin, right? And a lot of people should be thinking like that. So I've learned that. But you know, I went to a couple dinners where like they were like infused dinners, and I was like, this is pretty cool. You know, and everywhere I would go, the intersection, even everyone here who hasn't had a pop brownie at one point, right? The intersection of cannabis and food just kept coming up, and you know, as a restaurateur, wanting to say, what's my voice here? Like, I found that maybe there was an opportunity, and that's ultimately how I got into it. We went through the same process as everyone else. We had the lotteries and all this stuff. We risked capital, and at the end of the day, we came out. We beat the odds. Instead of getting 1, we won 3 licenses. And then I had to figure out how to. Now I'm talking about creating a brand instead of creating a one-off place. And then we just started looking for opportunities. Now, Roots, West Town Bakery on Chicago Avenue, we had a long time, those buildings were connected. A long time ago, I had bought the building next to it. It was an old record shop, because I was like, it's like Monopoly, right? You got Atlantic, Ventnor, you need to have Marvin Gardens or you can't build a hotel. I think in this case, it was Atlantic I bought. But anyhow, we bought it, and I said that if we can just put a dispensary next to these 2 restaurants that are, at the time, you know, 9, 10 years old, now they're 13, it might give me another 10 years at these restaurants, just because of the foot traffic that dispensaries bring. So that was sort of my initial proof and concept to do that, which is how West Town Bakery started coming into play, because it's literally next door. And then when we won 3 licenses, I said, all right, well, let's just put a West Town Bakery at all of them, and now we have a brand. And that's how it came about.
Now, this is interesting. I didn't ask you this. Has it affected your beverages at the location? Like, is there a percentage of, is it higher cannabis versus beverages, or vice versa? How does that work?
Well, just in general, what I'm seeing in a lot of my restaurants in the neighborhood specifically is my liquor, well, my beer sales are down, my liquor sales are up over last year, but ultimately all my alcohol sales are down from pre-pandemic at a lot of my places. We've raised prices everywhere too, which could be part of it. Maybe people are drinking at home more, but I think cannabis is part of it, for sure. People are, you know, drinking a little bit less, whatever way, shape, and form. And I think you've probably seen similar, right? So I don't know if it's cannabis. I think it's a number of factors that are affecting my alcohol sales. And I do believe that this is cyclical. I think that people will come back to the bars and start drinking again. The question is, how will cannabis be a part of that experience moving forward? And you know, I think I'm lucky to be a part of that discussion.
Okay. Well said. Any questions in the audience before we move forward? Yep. Let's start over here. One moment. Sure.
Hi. Question on restaurant fees. Let Us Entertain You adds 3% to customers' bills, and now I see some restaurants charge credit card processing fees to their customers. Do you think that this is something more restaurants should adopt, or do you think customers will push back and they'll have to do away with these fees?
Well, customers are pushing back, and we add the fees. Now we do it as a credit card processing fee. I always personally didn't. People have been doing this since before the pandemic, by the way. There's restaurants that, a 2% health insurance fee or whatever it is for staff. I always at that point felt like, well, we've subsidized our employees' health insurance since 2008. and I never charged extra. That I included in the price, right? You know, I don't think anybody's using any more gloves than they were. We've always used gloves, so that wasn't necessarily a pandemic thing for us. I get it with the masks, there were some different things. But I think one of the things that we are seeing now, and I don't want to get too deep into like the politics of all this stuff, right? But at the end of the day, in Chicago, the tip credit is going away. So there's your margins. Our margins are different than they've ever been, and people are using the interchange. People are coming in and using the rewards cards and all this other stuff, right? And as a restaurateur, you're paying for that. You can no longer afford to. So I thought about it. You know, every time I pay any contractor or I pay anybody with a credit card, they always charge a fee everywhere. You know, if I'm paying for this service here and I use my credit card as opposed to a check, why not pass on that 3%? Because that's what it is. So I get that from a consumer standpoint, I think most people really probably don't care. They're just not used to seeing it. If you've been dining out any reasonable amount of time since the pandemic, you've been seeing it forever. So, you know, I think some of it's just media, but I think it probably is the future. Now, what I think the real future is not a 3% service charge for credit cards. I think it's just a flat 20% service charge instead of tips. I think it's just, that's what it is. And you know, everybody, just charge it with the fee, this or that, but that's really, raise your prices. To be honest, that's not and I don't want to draw offense to anybody here, but that's not a good idea, right? Because if you're in Chicago and I'm competing with Indianapolis, Detroit, Las Vegas for conventions, and everything in Chicago is now 20% higher, and you've got convention bookers looking where they're going to go, then you're pricing yourself out, right? So I do believe that at some point a service charge is just the easiest way to do it, so you don't have to show us and everybody else being 20% more. But you know, it's a different way for us. We're not going to ever be Europe or the EU, because nothing's ever going to be uniform here because of the way our government is. So yeah, I see that kind of being the future. The only reason restaurants don't want that to happen is because of the FICA tip credit. So, you know, a service charge is a revenue, and a revenue gets sales tax on top of that. That I don't know if the consumer knows, but, you know, every year, because people pay taxes and we force our employees to report their tips truly, and we pay taxes on top of that, at the end of the year, we get a credit on our taxes as a restaurateur, which sometimes could be a significant amount of money. It's also a reason why a lot of people invest in restaurants, for those tax credits. So that's what you lose when you go to the service charge model. You essentially, it will work out the exact same for the server, with the exception that the server doesn't have the protections of being a tipped employee, meaning they could be asked to clean bathrooms. They can do things that aren't necessarily tip earning. So it could actually end up hurting the servers, but theoretically they should make the same amount of money. It's the people that own restaurants or invest in restaurants, they're the ones that don't want to see the FICA tip credit go away. For me, I'll give away the tax credit if I can just make my restaurants survive through the next 3-4 years of change while everyone's going through it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think surcharges are going to be a part of our business forever.
Now, let me ask the audience, as consumers, strictly as consumers, are you okay with the 3% service charge when you go out for dinner? Can you raise your hands? Okay, about half the room is okay with it, and that sounds about right.
Ask them if they want to pay cash. They pay cash or debit card. So the other side of it is, if you're not, and we say you want to take it off, can you pay us cash or debit card? Would that make you happy? Because that's what we do. You pay with a cash or a debit card, there's no service, there's no 3%.
Thank you. There was a question back here, I believe. Hang on for that.
Yeah, I was just curious. You mentioned, the real estate part of owning, having the real estate being a big advantage. Do you think that's significant too for a young new owner? Is that a big advantage there? Owning the real estate?
Let Mario get his steps in.
Yes.
So here's what I tell you. So it's not just me that owns real estate. My investors are on it with me, right? So I look at it as this, and my early on mentality was I'm not going to put a dollar into a building I don't own, which is why I have a lot of management agreements where I'm hired in hotels, I get a percentage of sales, there's really no risk. And then we have a ton of these deals where we own the real estate. And then I have one lease in the entire company. I've only ever signed one lease. It's at Piper's Alley, where I have Utopian Tailgate and we have Professor Pizza on the ground floor. So I've tried to only sign leases in what I consider to be an A+ property. So if you're trying to perform out this thing, because at the end of the day, you gotta, unless my first several restaurants, I put none of my own money in until I started making it. Now I invest along with my investors. But you're only gonna be able to open up a second restaurant if you take care of your investors on the first one, right? So where's the advantage of owning your real estate? Well, one, if it takes, things never go as planned. ROIs are great in a pro forma, and then you hit reality. Your garbage costs more, somebody gets rid of the tip credit, so now your entire labor model that you wrote 3 years ago, it's totally off, it's garbage now. Inflation, my food cost is no longer this, it's that, right? The whole thing. So owning the real estate provides another way for you to go back to your investors and be like, hey, listen, things are taking like Roots paid off real quick. Westtown Bakery, I told you guys, struggled. Now it's in a good place, but my investors never gave me a hard time because they own that piece of property with me. That when I sell it at some point, it's going to be another, 2x their money back, right? So there's a huge advantage to owning your real estate. You're investing into your own property. Now, the negative of that is, you're not going to likely find a piece of real estate and an A+ property at the same time, because not a lot of people are selling A+ properties, at least for a value that you can get in there and open up a restaurant. So that's where the risk is you're sort of taking a gamble at how well you think you know the area and what it might become, and hoping that that area becomes more valuable down the road. But at the end of the day, yes, I think it's a huge advantage. And like I said, now I haven't gotten a check or a distribution myself from 50/50, the restaurant, or the first Roots, in some of them in different periods of time. But I'm still employing people. There is an economies of scale, so I am still sharing marketing resources and all these other things. So they're contributing up to the, the master part of the group, right? And I'm paying down principal every month, while theoretically the place is appreciating. So I think that depending on what your outlook is, it makes a lot of sense. Now nightclubs, right, places that have like a 3-year shelf life, maybe it doesn't make as much sense unless you want to rebrand that nightclub every 3-4 years. But if you're looking to be a neighborhood restaurateur, maybe invest in a community that you believe in, I think there's no better way than to buy your real estate, assuming you can raise capital. If you can't raise capital, then you end up having to get some TI from a landlord, scrape together what you can. I've always said, well, either way, I got a personal guarantee. I'd rather have a personal guarantee with a bank than a landlord.
Well said. Thank you. Any other questions? Back.
Well, I'm curious. It's so common. Thank you. It's so common that people call our office and they ask for advice, and they opened a restaurant. They spent the majority of their money getting open, and then they have no money left to market their restaurant. And they're calling me for advice. If they're calling me for advice, you know that they're pretty screwed up. So my question would be, is there a formula that you use, and maybe Mario, you know this as well? What's the rule of thumb as far as allocating marketing dollars that you want to have in your mind, some sort of reserve, so that as you get to that starting line and you're ready to have the ribbon cutting, what type of resources do you want to have available in order to have a functional marketing campaign to make it a successful restaurant?
Well, the first thing is that you're using the word formula, right? And at the end of the day, if you're in this, we all know that the whole thing's a formula, right? What does your food cost need to be? What is your liquor? What's your total cost of good? What's your labor, right? 15 years ago, I think we would have said our labor cost should be a successful place around 25%. and that was still, 8 and 8, maybe 10 at management. Today, we have places that are 40% labor. And I used to say 5 years ago, if our places are doing 30%, if our labor is above 30%, it's going to be very tricky to make money. Today, like I just assumed 30%, and I'm pretty happy for the most part. And what's different, back then, my cost of goods, I would shoot for a 28 to 32% food cost. Early days of 50-50, I used to run a 35% food cost, because that's how much liquor I used to sell. Back before you got to this industry, the heyday there when people were drinking, yeah, it was easy to have the best food on the street, because I can sell the cheapest amount, and it's different now though, because if I'm anywhere, 50-50's food cost today is about 25 to 26%, and that was hard. Remember what happened to wing prices, right? We sell a lot of wings there. So these days I try to create a formula of, I need to be around all in, my cost of goods, alcohol, food combined, around 23%. Because I know that 37% is likely what my labor is going to come in at, but hopefully that's with benefits on top, right? So what's left after that for marketing? Well, to your point earlier, buying the real estate, right? I've always said as a rule of thumb, if your real estate, if your occupancy cost is more than a 7%, it is very tough to make it in this business. Very tough. So I try to find myself, now if somebody asked me to sign a straight 7%, percentage rent, that's your rent, I would say no, because also when you really make your money is when you exceed on the sales side and your occupancy ends up being around 4 to 5%. Back to the question before, marketing, right? The old rule of thumb was 3% marketing. Well, there are restaurants that I say, let's do 3% comps and then let's do another 3% marketing. The problem is, how effective is marketing these days? I don't know. I have a lot of above store marketing people and my sales haven't grown the way I want. So, it's hard to really give you the right answer for that, but we try to keep in each bank account's operating a statement at least 5 weeks of payroll. Some places will tell you the old 6-month rule on rent. You can never have too much working capital in a tough time, right? And I guess with marketing, the thing is when you have too much money around, you tend to throw money at marketing and you don't always measure the ROI. So, I don't have the answer on that one. I just got to say you need to be well capitalized regardless, because marketing is one thing, but running out of money to pay payroll is, to me, where I would be more focused on the early parts of a restaurant.
Interesting. That's good. Thank you. I have a little bit of a different take. We're at 4%, my organization, and our sales are a little shy of maybe a little above 4 million a year. We're a strict 4%. Sometimes we're under it, often we're over it. And we have 2 devices that seem to be the most effective. Social media being one, highly effective, and number 2, open table. And for those of us who have open table, it's the check that I hate to write, but son of a gun, it works, and it brings people through the front door. I tell my folks that my job as an operator is to bring a person through the front door. Everyone else's job is to get that guest to return, and that's how it works. The 4% is where we try to be at. Again, sometimes we're north of that, sometimes we're south. We're often more north than we are south, especially during some tough times. But I have to say that marketing, social media, critical, at least for our brand.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, one thing I'll tell you, Open Table is a very smart use of funds, especially some of their. I hate to give them credit, but some of their stuff works, especially with tourists in the right part of town. It's got different levels of effectiveness in different areas. And social media, what I will say is it's real easy to boost things, but that doesn't always turn the dial on getting people in. That's the hardest ROI to measure. So, yeah, it's a good question, Kerry.
Thank you. I just want to know, what is Open Table?
What is Open Table? So it's a reservation system where you would go online on your phone or on a computer and make a reservation instead of call a restaurant. There's a couple out there. There's like Resi, there's Top. So most, I would say 85 to 90% of the reservations today we get come in online versus the old call.
and Open Table is the most expensive of the three, by far, by far. Again, a tough check to write, but it works, so we write the check. Cool. Any other questions before we wrap up? Last question, sir, one more? Oh. Last question for you. Give us, where's your vision? Next 5, 10 years, perfect world situation for you, Scott. Where are you?
So we're looking out of state, to be honest. Now, we have a place that opened up in New York, so we manage the theaters for Second City. So we're out there in Brooklyn right now, which is cool, right? I mean, talk about like, wow, like what a great feeling. Also really competitive, and Chicago's really competitive. So you remember when, I remember when it was like to be like 20 years old and I play against a bunch of 6th graders at one of those like 7-foot basketball hoops. And that's what I'm looking for right now. So I am looking for, as hard as I'm working for the margins I'm at, I'm looking for opportunities where there's less competition, where I can take my tricks, if you will, and make money, maybe sweat a little less and sleep a little better at night. So I'm looking in places like Nebraska, Montana. I'm looking at opportunities like the Arlington racetracks that are no longer around. I'm also looking to get into that sort of concession, like the casino sort of world. I'm looking at unique, like fun opportunities that most people aren't thinking about. I'm also looking to get the Michelin star. I'm trying to raise $25 million right now to do a giant steakhouse and all that stuff in Chicago. So I still have a couple things there. And I come from the steakhouse world, so I need to obviously do that to show the old master I can do it. But yeah, I'm looking for that 7-foot hoop where I'm 2 feet taller than everybody else in the game.
That's a good analogy, thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Carrie?
Scott, that's great.